There comes a moment in life when you realize not everyone around you is rooting for you. Some people clap when you win, others bite down on their tongue and pretend. Some call themselves friends, partners, even family, yet quietly drain you like a battery left running in the dark. And here's the part nobody tells you. You don't need to expose them. You don't need to confront them. You don't even need to understand why they act the way they do. There is a far simpler way to make them disappear without a single argument, warning, or dramatic exit. Because toxic people don't survive in certain environments. They can't breathe in certain atmospheres. They can't take root in certain lives. Shift just a few behaviors, subtle changes that most people won't even notice, and the wrong people will remove themselves. No conflict, no confrontation, just gone. And what you're left with is space. Space for peace, for clarity, for people who actually build you, not bury you. Let's talk about the quiet habits that turn your life into a place where toxicity simply can't exist. The most powerful move you can make in dealing with toxic people is not shouting back, calling them out, or trying to expose them for who they are. The most powerful move is neutrality. Emotionally stepping back so far that their attempts to trigger, manipulate, or provoke you land with the same force as a pebble tossed at a mountain. Toxic people operate like emotional pickpockets. They are always reaching for a reaction, your frustration, your confusion, your guilt. They thrive on pulling you into their chaos because that is where they feel most competent. When you react, you're playing their game. When you defend yourself, you confirm that their opinion matters. When you try to explain, justify, or prove yourself, you are already losing ground. Neutrality strips all of that away. You stop feeding the flames they're so eager to ignite, and suddenly the fire doesn't burn. Imagine someone pushing your buttons, criticizing, twisting your words, using your insecurities against you. Most people get defensive. They explain why they're right, why they don't deserve the treatment, why the other person misunderstood. But every explanation is a gift. Proof that you're still emotionally available, still hoping to change their mind, still invested in the story they're weaving. Neutrality is the refusal to enter that story in the first place. It sounds simple, stay calm, stay unmoved, but emotionally it is a skill that takes discipline. Because toxic people are often the loudest, most dramatic forces in the room. They count on your immediate reaction, and they don't know what to do when you give them nothing. Neutrality doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've upgraded from reacting to observing. You start recognizing patterns instead of engaging in battles. You notice which tactics they use and exactly how they try to draw energy from you. And once you see the pattern, the game becomes boring. Not because you don't care, but because you're finally aware of what's happening. Toxic people expect you to defend yourself. They expect you to try to fix the misunderstanding. They expect you to drown in the emotional storm they stir up. But a storm loses all its power when you decide not to step into the rain. This neutral stance also acts as a mirror. When you stop reacting, whatever they throw, anger, blame, projection, drama, bounces right back at them. And most toxic people cannot stand the taste of their own behavior. They depend on emotional absorption. They want their negativity to become your problem. They want their guilt to become your responsibility. They want their insecurity to become your distraction. When you simply don't respond, they are left sitting with the energy they hope to dump on you. And that is something they are rarely equipped to handle. People sometimes confuse neutrality with indifference or passivity. But neutrality is power without noise. You still see what's happening. You still set boundaries. You simply choose not to fuel the interaction with emotion. You conserve your energy for what matters. You keep your dignity intact. You keep your peace intact. You refuse to let someone else choreograph your feelings. It is the act of saying, without speaking a word, you're not worth the disruption of my inner world. And here is what's fascinating. Neutrality reveals truth faster than confrontation ever will. When you stop responding emotionally, you begin to see who people really are. Healthy individuals adjust. They clarify. They communicate differently. They respect the boundary, even if imperfectly. Toxic people escalate. They poke harder. They exaggerate their victimhood. They may shift blame rapidly or attempt to smear you to others. Their only tool is reaction, and when that tool stops working, they unravel. You also learn something profound about yourself in the process. You learn that your emotions are not a public playground. You learn that you don't need validation to know you're right. You learn that someone else's opinion, especially a destructive one, has zero bearing on your self-worth. That kind of self-regulation builds a quiet confidence that is magnetic to high-quality people and repellent to those who thrive on emotional dysfunction. Neutrality is a silent filter. Toxic individuals stop coming to you because you are no longer a source of emotional supply. You are no longer entertaining their stories, joining their complaints, or absorbing their anxiety. You become uninteresting to them, and without confrontation, drama, or the need to prove anything, they drift away. And that is the beauty of it. You never have to slam doors, cut people off, or burn bridges. Sometimes you simply step out of the ring, and the fight ends on its own. The truth is this: most toxic behavior dies in the absence of reaction. The fewer emotional handles people have on you, the fewer ways they can manipulate or drain you. You become steady, grounded, deliberate. You respond when it's necessary and in your best interest, not when you're provoked. And once toxicity can't reach you, it has no reason to stay. That's when your world gets noticeably quieter, lighter, and more aligned with the life you're trying to build. There comes a point in your life where you realize peace isn't something you stumble into. It's something you build, protect, and enforce. And one of the most powerful tools you'll ever use to guard that peace is the ability to set, hold, and honor your personal boundaries. Boundaries aren't walls, they aren't ultimatums, and they aren't punishments. They are filters, clear lines that separate what is acceptable from what is not, what you will allow into your mind and spirit, and what you refuse to carry anymore. They are the quiet declaration that your well-being matters just as much as anyone else's. Toxic people dislike boundaries. For a simple reason, boundaries limit their access to you. They chip away at the room I once had to manipulate, drain, guilt, or control. People who depend on your compliance, your silence, your people-pleasing, or your fear begin to feel uncomfortable the moment you stand firm. But that discomfort isn't your responsibility to resolve. When you strengthen your boundaries, you stop giving others the power to define how you spend your energy. You reclaim your space. Most people were never taught how to set boundaries. Some were raised to be agreeable at all costs, to keep the peace even if it meant sacrificing themselves. Others learned that love was earned by being useful or accommodating. Many toxic personalities exploit that conditioning. They push, they test, they overstep, sometimes subtly, sometimes blatantly, just to see how much you will tolerate. And here's where strengthening your boundaries becomes a game changer. Once you start saying no and you mean it, you become a very different type of person to them. A strong boundary doesn't require you to yell or demand or justify. It can be as simple as "I can't talk right now," or "I don't accept being spoken to that way," or "I'm not available for this conversation." It's the tone of clarity that matters, not the volume. Toxic people don't need to be confronted with anger. They crumble perfectly fine when met with firmness. The key is consistency, because a boundary you set once and then abandon is no boundary at all. If someone violates your line and you let it slide because you're tired or afraid of conflict, or guilty, they learn one thing: keep pushing. People will test you not because they don't hear your boundary, but because they're waiting to see if you will enforce it. The moment you hold the line, not once, but every time, you communicate something powerful. The old access you had is no longer available. My peace comes first. And the reaction you get will tell you exactly who you're dealing with. Healthy people adjust. They may feel surprised or even uncomfortable, but they recognize your personal right to protect your emotional space. Toxic people often respond with pressure, manipulation, anger, or even pretending that the boundary doesn't exist. They may accuse you of changing, being selfish, or abandoning them. That's because your boundary exposes something they don't want to admit. The dynamic was benefiting them and draining you. But here's the hidden magic. Once you enforce your boundaries, a quiet sorting happens in your life. Those who are right for you stay. They rise to meet your expectations, they respect your time, they respond to your words, and they stop leaning on your silence. Those who cannot or will not respect the line begin to fade. They don't call as much. They stop coming to you for favors. They stop dumping emotional baggage at your door. They drift, not because you push them away, but because the relationship no longer yields what they want. Stronger boundaries also change you internally. They teach you to trust yourself. Begin to understand that your needs are not an inconvenience, that no is a complete sentence, and that protecting your well-being is not disloyalty, it is self-respect. You stop seeking permission to take care of your mental and emotional space, and in that shift you start attracting different types of connections, ones built on mutual respect, not dependency or control. Boundaries also redefine your time. When you stop giving energy to people who drain you, you suddenly have space for relationships that energize you. You notice your mood shift, your stress decrease, your confidence rise. You start choosing who you allow into your life instead of being chosen by default. And something else happens. You stop explaining yourself. You stop performing emotional labor for others. You start living in alignment with your values instead of being pulled in every direction by external demands. The hardest part of strengthening boundaries is not saying no to others, it's saying yes to yourself. Yes to your rest. Yes to your goals. Yes to conversations that don't leave you exhausted. Yes to relationships that feel mutual, reciprocal, and honest. Every boundary you set is a vote for the life you want, and every time you enforce it, you cast that vote again. Here's the truth people don't talk about enough. The moment you stop being available for chaos, guilt trips, emotional labor, and manipulation, the landscape of your life transforms. Not because you removed anyone, but because you stopped. Allowing access to your energy without conscious choice. Toxic people don't need to be confronted to disappear. They simply lose interest when they realize you are no longer a resource they can consume. And that is how boundaries quietly reshape your world. Not with noise or conflict, but with clarity, courage, and a refusal to betray yourself for the comfort of others. When your inner world becomes non-negotiable, the wrong people remove themselves, and the right people never feel pushed out. One of the most overlooked truths about life is this: chaos cannot survive without participation. Drama needs an audience. Manipulation needs engagement. Emotional turbulence needs someone willing to be swept up in it. The moment you stop stepping into the storm loses its power over you. Becoming unavailable for chaos doesn't require confrontation, yelling, cutting people off, or some dramatic declaration. It requires something far more subtle and far more powerful. Withdrawing your attention, ending your emotional accessibility, and refusing to be pulled into situations that serve no purpose but to drain you. Toxic people thrive in chaos because chaos keeps everyone confused. When emotions are high and logic is low, they feel safest. They know how to weaponize guilt, twist stories, turn themselves into victims, and lure others into playing a part in narratives they control. The more chaotic the environment, the less clarity others have, and the more influence toxicity can exert. When you decide you're no longer available for that, everything changes. It starts with recognizing how chaos is invited into your life. Maybe it's the coworker who always wants to gossip about someone else's downfall. Maybe it's the friend who only calls when they're in disaster mode and wants you to drop everything to rescue them. Again. Maybe it's the family member who creates tension, starts arguments, or plays emotional ping pong just to feel important. And sometimes, it's the person who seems perfectly harmless until you notice every conversation leaves you anxious, confused, or second-guessing yourself. Chaos doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it slips through the crack of curiosity, sympathy, or habit. The turning point is when you stop responding automatically, when someone tries to spark drama and you don't ignite with them, when someone throws a problem at you and you don't absorb it as your responsibility, when someone tries to bait you into defending yourself and you respond with silence or a simple, "I'm not discussing this." Chaos ends where your boundaries and your disinterest begin. Refusing to participate may feel uncomfortable at first. Many people were raised to believe that helping equals caring, that involvement equals loyalty, and that walking away equals abandonment. But being sucked into someone else's emotional tornado doesn't save them. It only sweeps you into the wreckage. You can care without carrying. You can listen without fixing. You can acknowledge their feelings without letting them dictate your own. And you can love someone deeply while refusing to join them in patterns that harm you. The most common tactic chaos uses is urgency. Toxic people want everything to feel like a crisis. You have to respond right now. We need to talk immediately. You can't leave this unresolved. That pressure is psychological bait. When you refuse to rush, refuse to panic, refuse to get pulled into their sense of emergency, you remove their control. Calmness is kryptonite to people who rely on emotional volatility to dominate situations. They don't know what to do when you stay grounded. Being unavailable for chaos also means letting people own the consequences of their choices. Many toxic individuals survive by outsourcing responsibility. Every mistake becomes someone else's fault. Every problem becomes someone else's job. When you step away and stop rescuing, something powerful happens. They face themselves. Sometimes they grow. Sometimes they spiral. Sometimes they go searching for a new hoe. Seeing any of those outcomes is better than sacrificing your peace to keep someone else comfortable. This shift doesn't just remove external chaos, it transforms your internal environment. When you stop allowing emotional turbulence to dictate your behavior, you begin to feel calmer, more confident, and more in control of your life. You notice that your nervous system relaxes. You don't dread certain phone calls. You don't replay conversations in your head. You don't feel responsible for managing other people's reactions. You begin to choose your interactions rather than react to them. And that is where real power lives, not in controlling the world around you, but in controlling what you allow into your world. Some people will accuse you of being cold or distant when you stop participating. That's because your worth to them was measured by how much chaos you tolerated. They didn't value your peace, they valued your availability. Once you no longer offer that, their discomfort will surface as criticism. Don't mistake that for truth. A person who respects you will never require you to abandon your stability to maintain a relationship with them. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, your life begins to reorganize around stillness instead of turbulence. The conversations you entertain become healthier. The relationships you maintain feel lighter. Your mind has more space for your goals, your passions, your well-being. Chaos has a hard time coexisting with purpose. The more focused and intentional your life becomes, the less room there is for the noise that tries to distract you from the person you're becoming. And that's the quiet secret. You don't have to force toxic people out. You simply stop allowing chaos to enter. You stop being the landing pad for drama, and the people who create drama drift away. Not because you rejected them, but because the fuel they need, your time, your attention, your emotional bandwidth, is no longer available. At the end of the day, becoming unavailable for chaos is an act of self-respect. It is you deciding that the calm you've earned is worth guarding. It is you recognizing that your life has value beyond being someone else's emotional punching bag or crisis manager. It is you refusing to let other people's instability dictate your internal reality. And once you make that decision, the most chaotic people in your life will eventually go searching for another outlet. They disappear, not because you chase them away, but because you stopped opening the door. There's a shift that happens in your life when you stop trying to convince others to treat you well, and instead decide to raise the standard for how you treat yourself. It's one of the quietest transformations you will ever make, and yet it changes everything. Because the moment you elevate your standards, even silently, even without a speech or announcement, the world around you starts rearranging itself. Not because you forced anyone else to behave differently, but because the version of you who tolerated certain patterns simply no longer exists. When you raise your standards, you stop operating from a place of survival or social obligation and start operating from self-respect. You begin choosing what aligns with your values instead of what's familiar or convenient. And here's the fascinating part. The people around you feel that shift before you ever say a word. They sense the difference in how you show up, in what you accept, in what you ignore, and in what you no longer respond to. The subtle adjustments speak louder than confrontation ever could. Most toxic individuals rely on proximity to people with low thresholds, people willing to excuse their behavior, overlook disrespect, absorb negativity, and normalize inconsistency. When your standards rise, those connections become uncomfortable for them, not because you are suddenly demanding more from them, but because you are quietly demanding more from yourself. You're no longer willing to shrink to fit someone else's comfort zone or lower your expectations just to keep the peace. Elevating your standards can start with the smallest changes. You stop laughing at conversations that are rooted in gossip or tearing others down. You no longer give your time to people who only show up when they need something. You invest in your personal growth instead of engaging in petty conflicts or circular arguments. You walk away from situations that used to keep you hooked for hours or years. Toxic people feel this distance. They no longer have easy access to the version of you that tolerated chaos. Raising your standards isn't about arrogance or superiority. It's clarity. It's realizing what kind of life you're building and what kind of energy supports that life. It's understanding that you can be kind without being available, compassionate without being used, and forgiving without giving repeated access to people who don't value you. Quiet elevation is not about proving a point. It's about growing past points that no longer serve you. One of the most transformative aspects of elevating your standards is how it changes your conversations. You stop wasting words defending yourself or explaining your decisions to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop oversharing with those who only listen for weakness to exploit. You start investing your words in those who reciprocate effort, curiosity, and sincerity. Your dialogue becomes intentional. And with that shift, many toxic individuals simply lose interest because without the emotional fuel, the dynamic that once benefited them no longer exists. You also begin to see your time differently. You recognize it as your most valuable currency, one you can't earn back. You stop spending hours trying to fix what someone else repeatedly breaks. You stop prioritizing people who never prioritize you in return. You choose activities, relationships, and environments that contribute to your growth rather than drain your potential. And just like that, without a fight, without drama, people who thrived on your availability start drifting to places where access is easier. But the deepest change happens internally. Elevating your standards reshapes your identity. You begin seeing yourself as someone worthy of respect, consideration, honesty, and peace. You make decisions from a place of worth, not fear. You stop compromising your values to be accepted. You no longer bend your boundaries to be liked. You don't settle for crumbs because you finally understand you deserve the whole table, and you'll build it yourself if you need to. Others see this evolution, and they respond in two ways. Those who are secure, healthy, and aligned with growth will rise to meet you. They will be inspired by your shift, challenged by your discipline, and proud of your progress. They won't feel threatened by your change. They will want to grow beside you. These are the people who stay. Those who cannot evolve with you will fall away. And not because you cut them out, but because your life no longer makes space for the version of them that refuses to grow. The energy mismatch becomes obvious. The conversations fall flat. The connection weakens naturally. Toxic people need cracks in your standards to slip through. When those cracks seal, their influence fades. The beauty in all of this is that quiet transformation carries no bitterness. You're not trying to punish anyone. You're not out to prove someone wrong. You're not motivated by revenge or pride. You are simply becoming someone new, someone more aligned with purpose, peace, and self-respect. That kind of change doesn't require declarations. It requires action lived out consistently, quietly, and confidently. In the end, elevating your standards is not about making toxic people disappear. That's just a byproduct. It's about rising into your own potential and creating a life that reflects the person you are becoming. When you demand better from yourself, the world around you has no choice but to shift, and those unwilling to rise with you will step out of the picture, not because you pushed them, but because you rose beyond their reach. There is a turning point in every strong person's life where they stop waiting for someone else to change, apologize, show up differently, or finally treat them the way they deserve. That turning point has a name: radical self-ownership. It is one of the most liberating shifts you will ever make, not because it changes other people, but because it changes you. It strips away the illusion that your happiness, growth, worth, or peace is dependent on someone else's behavior. It hands your power back to the only person who ever truly had it, you. Radical self-ownership begins with a simple but uncomfortable truth. You cannot control who comes into your life, who leaves, or how others behave. But you have absolute control over what you allow, what you tolerate, how you respond, and whether you continue engaging with people drain you. Toxic personalities thrive where blame, excuses, and self-abandonment exist. They feed off people who doubt themselves, who outsource their decisions, who feel responsible for everyone's comfort but their own. The moment you step into ownership, you become someone they cannot easily manipulate or contain. For many people, this shift feels strange at first, because we are conditioned to think life happens to us instead of through us. We're taught to believe the job, the relationship, the family dynamics, the circumstances determine our emotional state. But the truth is that radical ownership flips that belief upside down. It says, I may not have created every situation I'm in, but from here forward, I decide how it ends. The difference is subtle, but life-altering. It means no more waiting for someone else to stop causing problems. No more hoping a toxic person realizes their damage. No more bending yourself into knots trying to be understood, accepted, or kept around. You start making decisions based on where you are going, not where others want to keep you. When you take ownership, you stop explaining why something is hurting you and simply remove yourself from the source. You stop trying to persuade people to respect you and instead respect yourself enough to walk away when they don't. You stop waiting for permission to protect your energy or pursue what matters to you. You stop bargaining with people who only show up on their terms. And you realize you don't need validation because your actions are backed by clarity, not insecurity. Ownership also means being brutally honest with yourself about your patterns. It means admitting where you've allowed disrespect, where you've overgiven, where you stayed too long, or where you ignored the signs. This isn't about self-blame. It's about reclaiming agency. When you acknowledge your part, not in their behavior, but in your responses, you unlock the ability to do things differently. You break the cycle not with confrontation, but with self-correction. The moment you stop playing the emotional role someone assigned you, rescuer, fixer, buffer, peacekeeper, the dynamic crumbles. Toxic people need someone to absorb their chaos. When you take ownership of your life, you stop being that person. You understand that someone else's crisis is not your identity. Their expectations are not your obligation. Their disapproval is not a threat. You are no longer hooked by guilt, obligation, or the need to prove something. Radical self-ownership also changes how you speak to yourself. You stop narrating your life as if you are powerless or unlucky or always at the mercy of others. Your language shifts from "they made me feel" to "I allowed myself to feel" or "I chose to stay," and eventually to "I choose something better now." That shift doesn't excuse other people's behavior. It protects you from being controlled by it. It builds resilience, clarity, and emotional independence. And the more you take ownership, the less reactive you become. You stop taking things personally because you realize other people's actions reveal their character, not your worth. You stop engaging every insult or accusation because you no longer need to defend the truth. You live it. You stop begging to be chosen or appreciated because you are too busy choosing yourself. Something remarkable happens when you start operating from that mindset. Toxic people lose influence over you. They cannot shame someone who no longer carries guilt. They cannot trap someone who is willing to leave. They cannot belittle someone who knows their own value. They cannot manipulate someone who no longer needs anything from them. Not approval, not attention, not validation. Your growth makes you incompatible with their games. Ownership naturally elevates your environment. You start setting goals that stretch you. You cultivate habits that strengthen you. You surround yourself with people who are accountable, respectful, and as committed to growth as you are. You stop tolerating the bare minimum energetically and emotionally. Your life expands, your energy rises, and the people who once fed on your uncertainty realize there's nothing left there for them. In the end, radical self-ownership is not about perfection. It's about direction. It's not about blaming yourself for what others did. It's about deciding what you'll do next. It's not about becoming hardened. It's about dropping the weight of carrying everyone else's emotional baggage. And quietly, steadily, something profound happens. The people who can't survive around your strength, your clarity, and your ownership disappear. Not because you pushed them out, but because you finally stepped fully into who you were always meant to be. You don't need to shout to take your power back. You don't need to expose anyone, confront anyone, or convince anyone that you deserve better. You simply evolve. You master your reactions until no one can yank your emotions like a puppet string. You build boundaries that make your peace non-negotiable. You go silent in the face of chaos and watch the storm dissolve without you in it. You raise your standards so high that only those willing to grow can reach you. And you take ownership of your life so completely that no one else gets to steer your direction again. And then something incredible happens. The wrong people, the ones who lied, drained, manipulated, and pretended, start to fall away. They push, then prod, then disappear. Not because you fought them, but because their access expired. Your world becomes quieter. Your circle becomes stronger. Your choices become clearer. Your life becomes your own. And that's the lesson most never learn. You don't remove toxic people by force. You remove the environment that enables them. You build a life they can't breathe in. So keep growing, keep rising, keep choosing the version of you that honors your peace, your purpose, and your power. Because the day you become too strong, too clear, and too grounded for toxicity is the day it can no longer survive anywhere near you.